Hi, all. I'm Bill Frist, and for nearly 12 years as a cardiac surgeon, a heart surgeon, I operated 5 days a week on people's hearts. And every time I'd have the opportunity to open the chest, this may be too sort of dramatic to open a conference, but I'd open the chest hundreds, thousands of times, and look at the human heart and palpate what is the coronary artery, and then take a knife and open that coronary artery to do what's called a coronary artery bypass. So each day, it's pretty amazing now that I'm 20 years later, I'd have the opportunity to palpate that artery and come face to face with what nutrition really is all about. You'd see this fatty, this calcification, this hardened artery that would open before you. Not that nutrition caused all of that, but inadequate, unhealthy nutrition caused a large part of that. As a former senator, I've spent my post-legislative career focused on health equity, and particularly on population health and what we now know is food as medicine. And I'm thrilled to be with all of you for this fantastic panel today. Our panel today is focused on that fifth pillar of the conference, enhanced nutrition and food security research. And in particular, our panel today is focused on using evidence-based research to scale up, literally take these evidence-based programs and scale them up. The sort of research that we know is working out there to address food insecurity and diet-related disease. As we all know, the foundation of good policy is indeed good evidence. With us today, we have three literally evidence experts who are going to talk about how we can leverage research and leverage that data to scale of a proof of concept idea, account, facility, take it to scale. And it may be a pilot program. How do we take it to scale? And inform policies that promote health equity. Health equity will be the filter through which we will, as you hear our panelists today, be talking again and again. As we know, the best solutions are multifaceted, and it comes from a diversity of input by a diverse panoply of stakeholders who are out there, and that diversity gives the richness out there and the texture that we know becomes effective solutions. An academic, if you look at the three panelists today, an academic who's also a practitioner running New York State's program to provide nutrition education to low-income families with children. A philanthropist who is focused on both testing pilots and bringing them to scale in Massachusetts. The head of a food equity roundtable in Los Angeles who brings her private sector experience to bear in her implementation work. That rich diversity. We do have a few goals for you today. How pilots create an opportunity to innovate and be creative. The importance of cross-sector partnerships. How to scale pilots that work, and how we can apply an equity lens across all of our work. We want our time together to be conversational and to be fun, and also to be action-oriented. For all of you that are in the room and who are submitting questions, without further ado, let's dive right in. You know, first of all, welcome to all three of you.
Thank you.
You're all doing such fantastic work. I thought an interesting way to begin would be for each of you to talk really briefly, and because we'll be able to get to a little bit deeper discussion later, but about an innovative project that has something to do with food and nutrition security. And let's just sort of go right down. Angela?
Hi, I'm Angela Young. I'm a faculty member at Cornell University. I'm very excited to be here. And I can talk a little bit about an innovative project. I'm a researcher and a practitioner. So really, when we think about that connection, it is reducing the time in that connection between research and practice. One innovative project that I work on, oddly enough, is still in Chicago, and it's called Imani Village. It's a planned community development to look at all of the effective approaches to address the social determinants of health. And it's run by a church. And so the idea of people coming across different sectors and connecting. So the faith community, the research community, community-based organizations. So we're all working together to develop this planned community to address the needs of, in this case, an African American and Latinx community on the south side of Chicago.
I love it.
Yeah.
And again, we'll come back and talk about issues
Good.
like equity and others with it. All right, Ross.
Thank you, Senator. It's really wonderful to be here with everyone today, Angela and Swati. So I'll talk a little bit about school food. So I was a kindergarten teacher. That was my first job, and I was a school principal in Boston. And every day, while the senator was opening up hearts, I was opening up plastic wrapped food with sporks. And I would go to the cafeteria, and I would rip open with my plastic spork the plastic food. And I would choke it down with my students. And I would encourage them. I would say, look, I'm doing it. You should do it too. And I never questioned this. For years, I was in the school system eating plastic wrapped food. And it wasn't until I left the school system and I was challenged by my now colleague Jill Shaw, who said, why do we serve plastic wrapped food to our kids? And I said, well, that's just the way it is, because they get free lunch. So they get the plastic wrapped food. And she said, why does that have to be? Why don't we try something different? So we started visiting fast casual restaurants. And we saw that they could have kitchens in these little tiny spaces. And that we could have these beautiful serving lines for kids every day. And that in fact, we could give all of our kids voice and choice in their food and give them dignity and show them that we love them by feeding them real good food. So we now have My Way Cafe in Boston Public Schools, 125 schools, and many other school systems are modeling this idea of feeding kids real food. Food is medicine.
Swati.
Sure, and Senator Frist and my co-panelist, it's such an honor to share the stage with you, and I'm very excited to be here, especially for this conference. So there are a couple of projects. I think the thing that came out from COVID is innovation and collaboration. So there are a couple of projects I'll quickly talk about. One was Great Plates Delivered, which was a flagship project of Governor Newsom. And the project was designed around COVID for local restaurants to prepare and deliver food to seniors who were at home. And essentially, the purpose of the program was twofold. One, to support the local economy during the pandemic, but also serve the people who are most vulnerable, that were our seniors. The second one is the one that I'm with right now, which is the Food Equity Roundtable. So at the end of COVID, the county realized that we need to take a more comprehensive and systemic approach and a coordinated approach to look at food system, because there are segments of population who were disproportionately extremely vulnerable during pandemic, but honestly, the segment has been vulnerable even prior to pandemic. So we wanted to make sure we get together as a cross-sector organization, a coalition, funded by philanthropy. So we're funded by Annenberg Foundation, California Community Foundation, and Weingart Foundation, and co-led by county and philanthropy. But I want to call out all my CBOs and academia and private sector partners. And the purpose of a coalition is to identify solutions to address the unique needs of these segments. So back to you, Senator. These are the two initiatives I would love to share more about.
This is exactly what I wanted to do, to give all of our audience here and around the country who are streaming in a snapshot of the texture of what we'll be talking about here over the next 35 minutes. And again, you have instructions how to submit questions, and we'll save time at the end for your questions. Swati, you mentioned coming out of the pandemic and starting one of those two entities, and we all know that the pandemic required absolutely necessary creativity and innovation and dynamism and resilience, and that innovation is really quite remarkable. So let's talk a little bit about how local communities innovated to meet needs amidst the pandemic and what we can learn from that. We don't need to have a retrospective, but going forward, coming out of this conference with action as we go forward. So Angela, talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in the food assistance space.
Mm-hmm. I think that's extremely important. We saw pandemic EBT, we saw WIC pivot. I'm a big fan of WIC. Most people that know me know I've done research with WIC in collaboration with our WIC partners for many years, with the WIC food package, the cash value benefit, the waivers, telehealth. I think school meals innovated. And I know my colleague Ross will talk a lot about that, but we have seen a lot of innovation where years ago we used to say, we can't do that. You know, that's not possible. And now we've seen that pivot to serve families. And it's been critical. I mean, at the community level, we also work with a lot of urban farms that have played a big role in making sure food gets out to communities, pantries, and food banks. And so I think that food policy supporting what's happening locally is critical. So if we have effective policy that can pivot, and if a lot of those things those pivots stay permanent, it's important to really keep that momentum going. And we've seen that a lot of those shifts are effective. WIC is a really good example of that. WIC retention has been an issue, and participation has been discussed for many years. And we've seen with a lot of these waivers increase in the food package, increase in the cash value benefit, and an increase in WIC participation and retention.
Yeah, that whole list of programs, and all of us, even though it wasn't that long ago, were petrified coming through this, just petrified. And to see that resilience and that innovation come forward, which we've all seen in our lives, and then celebrating it, and then figuring out what to continue, what not to, what to take to scale, what not to coming in. Ross, what about it from the school nutrition area?
Sure.
Let's really stick a little bit of innovation in the pandemic coming out, but looking forward.
Try that. So let me start. I totally agree with Angela. There's so much innovation that came out of the pandemic, and that allowed us to do things a little better, more creative, and actually get resources in the hands of families who need them the most, which I think was one of the best things we did. I got to say, I was looking at some pictures this morning, though, of the pandemic food, and what we did in schools, at least in Boston, was relatively horrific. I mean, I looked at the shelf-stable bologna sandwiches this morning and was reminding myself of what we were serving our most vulnerable students. And we talked about health disparities. While we did provide food, and it was a challenging time, we provided, I would say, not nutritionally sound food. We were able, though, quickly to pivot. And we were able to partner with local restaurants, and with the USDA flexibility, essentially we're able to have restaurants cook food for our communities. And they were able to cook food that our kids and our parents wanted. And so we went to the community, we said, what restaurants would you like to eat at? And the first one was Spinelli's in East Boston, where everyone walks in Spinelli's and gets whatever they want. So we started a program called Local Lunchbox, where restaurants sponsored by the YMCA were able to offer local lunchbox specials every day. So any student, any parent could walk in Spinelli's and ask for the local lunchbox special, and they would get the same food that the person who was paying next to them received. And we did that all summer, 2 summers ago. We did it again this summer. We expanded to Chicago with the Obama Foundation this past year. And not only millions of meals, but millions of meals that are strong nutritional value of meals, but also ethnically, culturally sound meals that our families wanted.
Your description coming into the pandemic and the bologna, was that out of a default, was that a continuation of policy from the past, or was that just all that was available at the time? Was it intentional or was it accidental?
Senator, I would hope that it wasn't intentional, but we saw other places doing quite interesting things. They kept their school cafeteria kitchens open.
Yeah.
They were still preparing salads. They were still preparing real meals and serving it outside. But others just closed down all of it and just ordered shelf-stable food. And so sometimes we do what's easy for adults versus what's best for our customer. Sometimes we lose focus on our customer, especially in institutional feeding. And I would argue that there's many times when the pressures to go with a multinational company out of the ease of providing food and just saying we're providing millions of meals is easier for adults than it is to do the hard work and prepare real food for our kids.
It is resistance in schools around nutrition before the pandemic. Was it predominantly that? Is that schools have certain budgets, and if you get a mass producer who can come in and do it less expensive?
I could spend 35 minutes on this
I
topic
know.
alone.
You only got
but I'll
30
tell
seconds.
you,
Yeah.
school systems, superintendents, school committees are typically not culinary experts.
Yeah.
They're typically not in the business of doing food. They're in the business of educating students. And it's too often that food is an afterthought, even though it is the primary place in our schools where our students who are most at risk receive the majority of their calories.
All right, let's keep coming back to it, because I think out of this whole conference of the whole day, beginning with the president this morning, we've got to be thinking how we come out and execute, you know. And I love this whole school because it is a mind shift that the pandemic stimulated, and then how we sort of keep the good stuff and get rid of the bad stuff going forward. So I love it. We'll come back in. All three of you introduced in the first couple of minute introduction the importance of partnerships. Swati, let me turn to you. We all know that cross-sector partnerships in our own lives and when we're dealing with any issue, it's really community-based, are absolutely fundamental to moving the needle. Swati, talk a little bit about the role of cross-sector partnerships. You mentioned the Great Plates Initiative, but also the Los Angeles Food Equity Roundtable. Go a little bit deeper and let's sit with the partnership focus.
Sure, no, absolutely. And I want to give a shout out to, I know we are having a lot of watch parties back in LA, so if you're watching, hi to all the roundtable members and all the stakeholders. So the Food Equity Roundtable came out of pandemic when we realized, as I said, in the county that we didn't have a very unified and a centralized approach towards food. But we formed, in the county, we formed a food security task force, which garnered support from the local CBOs, the food banks of the world, but a lot of private sector companies also stepped up, and philanthropy. So in the process of doing that, what we realized is let's take this forward. So when the pandemic crisis kind of ebbed, the Board of Supervisors had a motion to form this Food Equity Roundtable. So we wanted to formalize our approach in terms of creating this cross-sector coalition. So at this point in time, we have a truly cross-sector coalition where we have academia, philanthropy, county government, the city government as well. But we also have private sector organization. And I do want to call out my community-based organization. They're the ones who are really doing the real grassroots level work there. But the private sector, though, coming from a private sector background, the one thing that was very positive is how much value that they can offer. And during pandemic, they actually stepped up, even with the Great Plates Delivered, just the delivery aspect of it, the restaurants. But the value of what food companies could offer is in terms of data and consumer behavior information. They are the ones who are the touch points with consumers who are actually coming in to purchase products and produce. There's technology companies, and talking about Vic, like during pandemic, if Vic went to telehealth and remote confirmation, the reality is a lot of us, when we buy homes, we are signing off big financial documents on DocuSign, and that's possible. But for Vic, we really had to get people in the offices that really didn't need a pandemic to figure it out. So for private sector corporation, there's one project that we are actually working on right now. It's an NSF-funded project. It's led by our university partners, University of Southern California. And what we are looking at is mapping out food locations by neighborhood. So LA is a very vast region, as you all know. So we are looking at a dynamic portal which will be tracking all the food distribution site, but also food retail, restaurants in a neighborhood. And we are getting that data from Yelp. We have DoorDash, Instacart, we have Microsoft, but we also have local retailers like Superior Grocers or La Monarca. I'm calling their name out because they're watching, and I really appreciate their partnership. But speaking with them, one, we got the data, but like speaking with retailers, we really had to understand, why do we have food deserts? What are the barriers they are facing? The cost of retail space is very expensive in food desert. The cost of financial loan, because it's considered high risk, it's very expensive them to maintain that cost mechanics. Plus the demand generation to ensure that there is enough nutrition education so people are, when they're walking in, they're buying the produce that we want them to sell. So that whole supply demand, so just getting that perspective insert, like honestly, that is a big project for us because it'll help us predict and see the dynamic change in demographic in a neighborhood. If we start seeing a lot of locations shutting down, then the government or agencies can take proactive steps to actually ensure that that doesn't become another food desert. So that's one project where it's a cross-sector partnership, and we really appreciate the private sector in that too.
This pillar very much is about research, evidence-based, going to scale, the use of data. So, Swati, your example is really interesting. Go just a little bit deeper, because we do have tens of thousands of people listening now. And when your shout-outs are good, because you're really shouting out to people all over America who are engaged every day in the organic, the gritty work that we're talking about. So I'm listening to your shout-outs. I know people appreciate that. But the technology and the way you describe the use of data, which everybody benefits from, you had to get a partner. So take a little bit deeper. How did you get that partner? Was it you or your board, or somebody had to knock on a door, or did you have somebody from the private sector who said, oh, listen, we're watching all this and we got a good solution to try? Because how you create these partnerships, where does it come from? And just use an example.
Sure, and I'm glad you asked that question. I think it takes a village. So of course, a lot of partnership came, a lot of companies reached out to us during COVID. Like I know Uber had reached out. We didn't leverage them for Great Place, but I know Uber had, DoorDash had, a lot of like delivery companies reached out. So there's goodness, like this is our combined society, right? We all live in this together, so I think there is a lot of value they can offer. But then on the other hand, we reached out to a lot of companies. So definitely the board had reached out to a few. A roundtable of philanthropy, their partners, they reached out. But we tapped into our partnership, like my network of people that I knew. And honestly, anytime you reach out to them saying that, hey, we are looking for solutions that will help the society at large, you'll be surprised how open companies are to, they're companies that they're creating arms that are just focused on public sector investments. Microsoft definitely has one. Instacart has an entire section dedicated. So there is a lot of interest on both sides. So as we reach out to them, and the roundtable was the forum, the one thing, of course, we have to commit to, and which I think is for all of us, anytime we're invited to any group, is we want real action, maybe small, but we want to make sure we see tangible changes. So getting partners on, honestly, sir, wasn't that big an issue. Yeah.
Ross, obviously you had to do exactly the same sort of thing in terms of building partnerships as you built your kitchens and you launched your student meal programs during the pandemic, and before, but during the pandemic. Give us a little bit of the texture of the partnership, how you pull it off, how incrementally beneficial it's been.
LA sounds awesome. That sounds, what a great, I mean, data-driven, what great partnership, that's awesome. For us, look, first I'll say, I don't know what a philanthropist is, but I think that's what I'm called. I work at a foundation. We partner with government because we believe that partnering with government, using philanthropic dollars, the best way you can leverage those dollars is to partner with government. Mm-hmm. Because change happens slowly, but with government. And the idea that we've had, all of our work has been to help government take risks and to take chances that they would otherwise not take. And so with school food, 5 years ago, we worked with then Mayor Walsh, who's now Secretary of Labor. And we went to him and said, Mayor Walsh, can we take a risk? Can we build, 3 little kitchens in these schools? And construction is very difficult in schools as it is. And he said, sure, go ahead, try it out. So we worked with a construction company, we worked with local chefs, we worked with our students and family groups and parent organizations and community organizations, and we created a menu and we started cooking food. Most important people we worked with were the cafeteria, the food service workers in those schools. We engaged them, we talked to them about their love of food, we helped them create these beautiful meals, and then we tested to see if it worked. Could we pay for it? How expensive were these meals going to be? Could we get under the USDA subsidy? Could we train staff to make these meals all the time? And then would students enjoy the food? And not all the time. Students did not always enjoy the food. We tried tofu, still a little dicey on the menus. And but you can measure all these things and see, you could build a model and see how these things work. That's what the partnership looks like to me, is that we need to bring in private sector, nonprofits and others to help government take risks, measure their investment, see if it works, and if it works, scale that project. And that's what we did with My Way Cafe, and that's what we're doing with what we call local lunchbox around Massachusetts and in Chicago.
So much of the conference, and as we looked in the room with the president this morning of the 600 people around, the diversity of business, of nonprofits, of for-profits, of the corporate world is pretty impressive. And it does send a signal that we're all in this together. And Ross, I love your description of government. I was government for 12 years. In the last 14 years, I've been in the private sector creating companies and nutrition and food and other areas. And I think you described it pretty well. The government, and it should not take as many risks. You know, our government needs to be the security. It needs to be sort of the backdrop, and it needs to set the guardrails. But the dynamism and the creativity and the innovation and the access to capital are why we need the private sector, and the measurement and the nimbleness. And I think that you mentioned risk, and I'd extend it a little bit in terms of the access to capital and other things that we have.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Government shouldn't take risks, a whole lot of risks. We should be careful. But we got to see a whole lot more innovation happening in government, particularly around school food. We got to see something different happening, particularly in our large urban districts, which are still relying on multinational companies to feed our kids unitized meals. They meet the USDA regs, but it's not okay. It's not okay for other students to do it, so it's not okay for students who are getting free lunch to do it, to have that food.
Let's talk a little bit about scale. We got to have scale, and you've all given us fantastic examples of work that's happening on the ground in our communities, and in communities all over America. But how do we make sure that for all of us engaged in this work, that this work is not just pockets of brilliance and pockets of creativity or built around a charismatic individual? It may start with that, but rather that our work reach higher and further and further and wider. And so, Ross, just while we're on you, you've launched the pilots and you scale them, the testing and the scaling and the things that work. Just talk a little bit about your experience there.
Sure. Look, not everything that we've tried with our partners has worked. And I think that's important when we talk about pilots or innovation. Sometimes when we talk about pilots, all we're doing is talking about something that people just think we're going to guarantee to scale that, right? Oh, I'm doing a pilot. They're like, okay, yeah, really what you're trying to do is do the whole system or really scale what you're doing. So I think we have to treat pilots like pilots and know what we're going in for, measure if it's effective or not, and then get rid of it if it doesn't work. And we have to be comfortable doing that, first and foremost. And then I would just say, like, we have to be comfortable taking those risks. We have to be comfortable partnering with people like Angela, who can tell us if what we're doing is working or not. I think in school food, we don't have enough research, in my mind. Now, Angela reminds me that we do, and that therefore I'm not connected enough to the research. But we gotta figure out how the nutritional value of food, the life outcomes of kids who've been receiving school food. We should know health, nutrition, what's going on in their gut, what's going on with their nutrition, what's going on with their health. And I don't know enough about it. And so I would just say, speaking on behalf of anybody who doesn't know Angela's research or partner enough with higher ed or other researchers, we need to do a better job of connecting with researchers and knowing if what we're doing is working.
Angela, just comment on that, because I think it's really, really interesting. Many of us, some of us have worked together before, but that conversation just now, you got the academic world. Obviously, you've taken it and you're in the community. I have to say, for an academic, you're an exception, in the whole academic world. But the comment on sort of lack of awareness of people who are actually in the field of the great research that academic people have. It's kind of town gown, but how would you characterize it for the nutrition world?
Yeah, and I actually want to build on a point that Ross made. I think it's more of us. We're growing. We're out in the community, responsive to the community. And so this idea of just sitting in an ivory tower, particularly among younger faculty, they're not interested in that. Yeah. They want to be out in the community. They want to see change. We have more faculty from BIPOC communities. You think of communities that have historically been impacted by structural oppression. They want to see the academy do something in community. So they're pushing. And pushing. Yeah. The younger folks are pushing. Yeah. And so I think through partnerships, we have to partner with communities, make sure people's voice, the lived experience voice is at the center. So a lot of research we do is really with connecting with communities and make sure that that lived experience voice is highlighted. When you talk about bringing something to scale, it's not only just reaching people, but it has to be able to be implemented. And we need to make sure that we understand enough about what worked, as Ross said, what didn't work, and then also what resources we need to make sure it's effective. And so those lessons learned are so important. But if you don't have one size doesn't fit all. And so if you don't have the voice of people in that community at the table, then you won't really understand what's effective to scale up.
And so we have to continue to tear down those barriers between the academies and academics and communities, and it's an age-old issue. But I'm kind of encouraged by the discussion and your comments, and part of it's pandemic, but part of it's just the youth and the diversity and the demands of the times themselves. The academic world does play, and historically plays, because of the peer review, the demands, the measurement, and Swati, I'm going to come to you, get ready, on measurement and use of data. One of the good things, at least I've found in setting up collaboratives on health and in K through 12 education, is the academic world does a great job in demanding standards, data, measurement, peer review, which we need to do a better job in sort of the nonprofit world, measurable results. Swati, talk a little bit about data. You said a little bit, go into scale, and you kind of started this discussion. Sure. And then after that, we'll turn to health equity, because that's the lens that we're looking all through everything that we're saying now. So stop short of the health equity, but talk about data and your use in going to scale.
Definitely, and I do want to acknowledge Angela, who's, her work is really kind of very inspiring, and academics is actually that core of thinking that pushes us beyond what we are today. So like really researching and helping us analyze. So, very much acknowledge the work of academics. World wouldn't be where we are without them. That said, and there's a whole, in UCLA, I know they are pushing a lot for implementation science aspect of understanding. It's not just about executing, having good idea and going out with it, but how effectively you execute that idea is where the success lies. I mean, we all know that ideas are great, but if it's not done right, if it's not measured right, then it really doesn't help. And case in point here being, so for example, when the farmers market started in 1970s, I believe, the intent of the farmers market was to make sure we offer a platform for small farmers to have this direct to consumer access to sell their produce. And for people on the other end who did not have enough access to fresh produce, have this as a platform to buy those produce. So as we're working with our community partners, one of the things they keep asking us to look into is how we can ensure that as we're opening the farmers market, that we are enabling that process. We are still reaching the same two target audience that we are talking about. Is farmers market success is not opening new farmers market. Farmers market success is based on, are we reaching the small farmers that needed that platform, the people who were struggling to get fresh produce in their local neighborhood are able to use their, the EBT cards or GusNIP program. We have something called Market Match. Like all of that is being leveraged in that farmers market, or is it becoming a place where we go for just kind of walking around in an evening? So I think the definition of success and therefore data, performance metric, is extremely critical in a pilot. And also as we are rolling out a pilot, just because it's been successful in one place doesn't mean it's going to be successful in others. For example, a good program in a large school district may not translate into a successful program in a small school district. They don't have that kind of capacity. So just evaluating the circumstances that changes, and so consistent innovation and validation of a pilot is needed to really be successful. So
Debbie, I think you said it perfectly, this measurement application going to scale coming forward.
Yes, sir.
We're going to have to close. I just got a message here, which is like killing me. I opened and basically said that everything from the president's comments this morning to the report released yesterday is on health equity. And Angela, I'm not going to put a huge burden on you, but you're going to bring us to a close on the equity issues, the lens through which we're viewing everything we do when it comes to hunger, nutrition, and health.
So I first want to give a quick shout out to Extension, Cornell Cooperative Extension. So when you talk about how to disseminate what works, looking at evidence-based, moving out into the community. So quick comment on that, but I think even that is critical when we think about equity. We have to have programs that are effective, but we also have to make sure they close gaps. A lot of the gaps have persisted. If you look at food insecurity, those gaps have persisted for decades. And so it's critical with this conference that we do a lot of the things that happened in the last conference, that we innovate, that we think about boots on the ground, those implementers in communities, and we also think about people in communities, those families, and we need to change the lives. If we can't change the lives of families, then this conference won't be effective. We have to look at making sure we improve outcomes, but we have to close gaps when we look at the historic and structural oppression that has occurred over hundreds of years. It's time to really see that change, and I know we can do it. I know we can do it.
And we can do it, and it is closing the gaps, which means you need to measure the gaps. It means to recognize that everything we do and look at has a disproportionate impact on marginalized populations and vulnerable populations. You've heard the issues, an incredible group of experts with us today. Taking an equity lens is critical to this work. I want to thank our panelists for getting us really equipped with actionable insights so that we can all move the needle. And thank you to our audience today. It is appropriate to close with a call to action, urging each of us to consider what we can do as individuals and as groups to what we have learned today and taking it forward. Thank you all very, very much. And round of applause for our panelists.